Hello and welcome to the Indiana State Police Public Information Program. I'm your host today, Senior Trooper Dave Burston, Public Information Officer with the Indianapolis State Police Post. We have a special guest here with us today, Master Trooper Roger Popplewell. Roger, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave.
I appreciate you taking time from your schedule to drive down to Indianapolis from your district of assignment, Fort Wayne. So I know it's a bit of a drive here and you'll have a bit of a drive on the way home. So thanks for taking the time to come out.
You're welcome.
What we're going to be talking about today, to tell the public a little bit about, are the air rescue capabilities of the Indiana State Police. Now, I understand that our air rescue team, as compared to some others across the nation, we're really not that old. We've just been around a couple of years. Is that right?
That's right, since about 1992.
Was there some driving force or something that happened that brought the importance of having an air rescue team about?
Well, we were looking at the capabilities of our air section as well as the capabilities of our personnel. And through evaluating and really going all around the country and taking a look at what other states have to offer their public, we decided to institute this program back in 1992, and it's been very successful so far.
Is there any particular event that you've seen where the rescue team has been used already, that it's proved itself?
Yes, it has. On a few instances involving the emergency response teams, they have taken and actually inserted people, also flown cover sound for hostile situations like that.
Now, when we look at an air rescue team, we're talking about issues of not only rescuing people, perhaps we might think about a disaster or a storm or flooding. So we're looking at rescue situations not only on land but also in water.
That's correct. We have large bodies of water all across Indiana, and in every area that we have a specially air team set up that is capable of executing any type of rescue on water.
And when you talk about team, that is a good point. It's not just, we're not just looking at a pilot and then somebody that's leaving the helicopter either into the land or a water situation, but there's a group of people involved in this. Can you explain to our viewers all of the people involved that comprise a team?
Yes, I can. First of all, it's the pilot. The pilot's responsible for flying the ship or the helicopter, and after that the responsibility shifts back to his crew chief. The crew chief acts as the pilot's eyes and ears. Things that the pilot may not be aware of, the crew chief can relay information to him as far as how the rescue is going. The crew chief's responsibility, of course, is to make sure that the rescue itself is safe as possible. We know that
given the circumstances.
Exactly right. We know that there's going to be some risk involved, but his job is to make sure that it's done as safely as possible. We don't want anyone to become a victim themselves during a rescue.
Now, aside from the crew chief, the crew chief and the pilot, who else is involved?
We have team members that are maybe riding the skids of a helicopter, which is the legs or the extensions down off the helicopter, and they can stand out off the skids and be deployed from the skids. We have a couple of different methods of getting people off the helicopter. One's a hover jump, which the helicopter actually comes in and hovers very low over whatever they're going to get off on. It could be the water, it could be a building, it could be any elevated platform. And then they actually get off the helicopter before it lands, because there's some structures that wouldn't support the weight of a helicopter.
Oh, an excellent point. So that it's not a point. Some people might think, well, the helicopter could just land, people could get off, and then go from there to whatever the situation dictates. But I want to jump back a little bit when you talked about the crew chief and the pilot, because it sounds like, obviously you have to have the pilot to fly the craft, but it sounds like a whole lot of responsibilities on that crew chief, because of course, Anybody that's familiar with helicopters knows that as a pilot, you've got to devote your attention to what you're doing. You're looking around to see if there's guy wires or electrical wires,
Exactly.
other aircraft, where the crew chief has to, as you said, has to be the eyes of telling that pilot everything that's going on, I guess, directly below.
Exactly. The pilot cannot see directly below the aircraft. So the crew chief, he can lean out over the aircraft. He's safely secured to the aircraft himself, so there should not be any danger of him falling from the aircraft. So he can actually lean out, look below the craft to make sure that there's no obstacles or anything of that nature, and safely deploy the rescue team.
You talked about the crew chief being safely secured to the helicopter. That brings us to another point that might be of interest to our viewers. We talk about the safety and the special equipment. I am assuming that there's got to be an extraordinary amount of equipment that's used. Can you talk a little bit about the equipment?
Each team member is issued a couple of pieces of equipment. I brought one of these with me today. This is a special rappel belt that we can wear upon our uniforms. It actually has a twofold purpose. Number one is to secure any gear to our bodies. And number two, it actually has a ring which is sewn into the fabric and can withstand several thousand pounds of pull. So it can, a carabiner or a ring can be attached to this, and also it can attach the rescuer to the helicopter itself.
So in essence, that is enough there that if you were actually going to pick somebody up, like off the top of a building that's on fire, for example, or somebody out of the water, that's going to support your weight plus at least one or two more people?
Yes, it will.
So, now, well, you talked about a beaner. You don't have one with you, but could you explain what that is?
A carabiner is, sometimes we call them a D-ring or something of this nature, but it is a ring that we have that we can actually clip into the rescue equipment, and it binds us together. And it actually locks into place, so there's no danger of it coming unhooked while we're in the middle of an operation.
So it's not like an open hook, it's totally enclosed.
Enclosed, that's exactly
Okay.
right.
Now, when we talk about the training involved, I imagine that there's, aside from the initial training, which I'd like you to comment on, there's got to be some ongoing, continuing training to stay up to snuff. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I can. Each member needs to complete a 40-hour air rescue or air insertion course. And that's done an intensive week at different locations throughout the state, in which you have an area pilot and also the rescue team members. They get married up together. And they train very intensively for 8-10 hours a day sometimes. But the minimum amount of training that they have to receive is 40 hours. After that, the pilot comes back each year, and we need to recertify each year to make sure our skills are polished. In addition to that, we need to train once quarterly with that pilot. So it doesn't matter if it's 80 degrees in summertime or whether it's 10 degrees below zero. We still need to make sure that we can still measure up to what our expectations are.
Well, and that brings up an excellent point, because you never know what the situation is going to be. It could be a building on fire, a large structure in January, or it could be a capsized boat in the middle of July.
That's right. It could be virtually anything.
Can you talk a little bit about, I know there are dual purposes of the air rescue team. Part of it is with the ERT, and for our listeners, that's the emergency response team that goes out to special critical incidents, usually involving a law enforcement emergency. And I know that we cannot compromise that kind of information, but if we look at it strictly from safety aspect of a rescue, what are some specific things you're concerned at? Say with a building that's on fire, people are up on the rooftop, what are the special considerations that the team looks at then?
Special considerations there is, first of all, the number of victims that are up there. Would it be feasible to start extracting those people from a rooftop? And second of all, is it safe for the helicopter to safely make an approach and make that rescue? We need to be thinking about a number of things at that time. Is it worth the risk? Of course, we never want to put a helicopter at peril, because if we become a victim ourselves, we haven't done anything but contribute to the
just
problem.
compound, because now you have your original emergency problem, then you've got to have additional people to rescue those in the helicopter.
Exactly right. It's much like a trooper responding to an accident and having an accident himself.
Doesn't do anybody any good. Now, when we look at the water rescue, it would seem to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, it would seem to me that the water rescue, easier is not a good way to put it. unlike going to a building and having to be concerned about all the man-made obstacles that are around a building, if you're out in an open water area, is it easier to make that kind of a rescue?
Sometimes it is. With ice rescue, if you have people that have walked out on a soft body of water, maybe that is frozen over and you've got open water in some areas and they are not aware of it, they could actually go through the ice and be sustained there but could not crawl out because the ice is so thin. This is where a helicopter would really be handy to have, so you could actually fly out, hover over them, and drop a loop so we could actually pick them up out of the water and drag them over to a more secure piece of ice, or better off, right onto good dry land.
So each circumstance is going to have different considerations, be whether it's a water rescue or being a land rescue. We've talked a little bit about some of the equipment that you have. Can you tell a little bit more about what equipment they might be wearing, either for an air rescue or a water rescue?
Well, each one of us are issued one of the safety rappel belts here. We also have a full harness that we wear. If we're going to be sustaining as a crew chief, or if we're going to be a rescue member itself, we're still going to have something around us to keep us on the helicopter. In the event one of us slips off or anything happens that unsuspectedly renders a rescue member disabled, we still don't want them falling from the helicopter, so that they must stay in constant contact with that helicopter. Most of the time, that helicopter will not fly unless that member is securely fastened to that helicopter. And that's the crew chief's job, to see that that safety precaution always prevails. And then he relays that information on to the pilot.
So, because one of the big considerations with a helicopter is even distribution of the weight.
Exactly.
So you can't have people sloshing around or moving back and forth. They've got to be securely attached. And when they're on the skids, they have to stay pretty motionless, don't they? Because just shifting your weight, that can affect the helicopter, can it?
That's true. Most of the time, the members are going to be looking straight ahead and down, the rescue members are, and they're going to be focused on what type of rescue and what type of things they need to prepare themselves for once they disembark that aircraft.
So each person has their specific assignment, their specific duty, and just like the name team implies, everybody's relying on each other to do their job.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Roger, please stay with us. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back after this break.
It's not a body shop, it's a chop shop where stolen cars are stripped of their parts. 1 in every 200 registered vehicles in Indiana is stolen. Law enforcement is combating this problem, but they need your help. The Indiana Anti-Car Theft Committee, IAC, has set up a toll-free telephone number for reporting car thefts. This call could get you up to $5,000 for information that leads to an arrest, conviction, or recovery. Call 1-800-AUTO-TIP. Cold cash for Hot Wheels.
Hello and welcome back to the Indiana State Police Public Information Program. I'm still your host, Senior Trooper Dave Burston with the Indianapolis Post, and we've been talking with Roger Popplewell, who's a Master Trooper from Fort Wayne. Roger, you've given us a lot of good insight and a good overview, I think, about some of the air section capabilities as far as water rescue and air rescue on the land. And we'll try and talk about some other specific items, and some of that being some of the equipment that's mounted to the helicopter. Can you talk about some of that?
Yes, I can, Dave. On the front of the helicopter, there's a large searchlight, and that can be very effective as far as searches after dark, also locating some hidden objects down on the ground. A lot of times just a little extra light will help the ground units find what would normally be invisible to them on the ground, but a little bit of light will shed a lot of light upon that situation.
And I think sometimes people don't realize just how powerful that light is. At nighttime, it lights up and brighter than the sun. It's like intensifying the sun's rays on a specific area.
Yeah, we'll call that the night sun a lot of times, where we actually call for the helicopter out, nothing more than to illuminate the area and help with a search if we're involved in that type of detail.
Now there's another specific device that can come into use for maybe a lost child, or occasionally we hear about somebody walking off from a nursing home and they're on medication but nobody knows where they've gone to, and there's a device that actually senses heat. What is that?
That's called a FLIR, Dave, and those are mounted on the helicopters as well. What those are is instruments that are actually heat sensing devices. So you can fly over an open field or a wooded area or something of this nature, and it will actually pick out heat sources.
So that will work on something as minimal as a small child, or
Small animals. Sometimes.
Small animals.
Yes. So we can actually look and identify different things from the air. So that will rule out.
It kind of paints a picture, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Some of the other equipment that you use for rescue, there's something that you were telling me about the break called a Billy Pugh net?
A Billy Pugh net, yes. That's a large net that hangs from the belly of the helicopter, actually. And it's a large net that a rescuer can ride in and actually take, and people can get into this net and ride from one hazard maybe to safety.
So that'd be a method of what somebody's rescued with.
Yes, it is.
Now, how many people could fit in that?
Well, normally you don't want to overload the aircraft, so the rescuer and one other victim would be probably all you'd want to put in there. You might be able to get another small child or something like that in there, but you have to keep in mind the capabilities of the aircraft itself, how much thrust it has, what are the weather conditions outside. Believe it or not, in the wintertime, a helicopter can haul more than what it can in the summertime with the hot air.
Oh, that's because of the change. It's kind of like a hot air balloon. You
Yes.
always hear that they want to have a cooler weather, so it's easier to get more lift.
Exactly right.
Now, if you have somebody in the Billy Pugh net, when they are offloaded, can the helicopter actually land? Is there enough distance between the bottom of the craft and between the skids, or do they have to hover and then have assistance from ground personnel to unload that?
Well, it can be done in a couple of different ways. The radioactive, it's not radioactive.
Well, that's good.
The remote control for the Billy Pugh net is located inside the helicopter, so if the pilot needs to detach that, he can do that remotely. Other than that, the rescuer has a radio on and can actually radio up to the pilot what's going on underneath him, how much he has to hover, if he needs a close distance from the ground. Once they're offloaded and everyone's safely gone from the Billy Pugh net, he can detach at that time.
So it sounds like that's a piece of equipment that on any type of a rescue, I imagine, is that automatically hooked up, or is that something that do you have to hook it up before you,
Yes, you do.
leave, or can you do that while you're in the air?
Well, actually, it has to be hooked up on the ground, Dave,
Okay.
before you take it into the air and actually effect a rescue. Other than that, it's just something that's going to be on an on-call as-needed basis. You won't actually put it on every rescue until that situation dictates that you would use that Billy Pugh net.
Now let's shift gears a little bit to when we talk about searching. We've talked a little bit about rescue. At a rescue, you know the specific spot that you're going to, whether it's on the ground or in the water. You can have an idea of the circumstances that you're going to be facing. But if you're looking for a lost child, you've got a lot of geography to cover. Are there different types of patterns, or do you just look where people have said, well, we think something's here? Is there a methodical way of doing a search?
Well, there are several different types and theories of searching for people, Dave. One of the most is just basically getting as much background information as you can. Is there a particular geographical area that the child or person likes to go to? If they're of juvenile age, do they like to frequent a particular area? And then try to search out that area as much as possible with the use of that aircraft. There are different theories, and people will tell you, well, if you would take everything and divide it by 9 and then subtract something else from it, with a lot of hypothetical situations, I don't think there's any one situation that holds true every time.
So you just have to look at the circumstances at hand and develop the best plan possible.
Exactly right.
So when we look at the different things that are involved with air rescues and we look at searches, unfortunately something that also happens is you maybe get the call after a situation has happened, and unfortunately it's not a search anymore or a rescue, but you're actually having to recover a body. What kind of things are involved with that? Because I imagine there's a lot of weight to give thought to. Are you going to be jeopardizing the crew on the helicopter? Of course, the family wants the remains of their loved one back. What things are involved with body recovery?
Body recovery, Dave, is something that no one wants to do by any way, shape. But if you go out and try to execute a body recovery, the aircraft is very useful in that, because you can bring that elevated platform up above a body of water and actually search several feet down into the water. You can see things much more from the air than you ever could, let's say on the water surface from a boat. You can cover much more distance, and you're much safer up there. If there's a lot of things going down, let's say it's a river and it's got a lot of tides down there and the current is very heavy, it would be impossible sometimes to search with a boat, where you could actually get up with a helicopter and make an effective body recovery.
You talked about being on the water, and aside from the body recovery, but the actual insertion of team members with scuba equipment on. Now, I imagine that's got to be kind of tough. They've got their tank on, their fins, all the equipment. What kind of training is involved with the water insertion?
Well, each type of diver, there are dive masters and there's regular divers. The dive masters are the instructors for the divers, and they have to go out monthly and do monthly dives to maintain their certification. So they're very well qualified in what they do. What we are more concerned with than ever is the divers being deployed off the helicopter and maybe falling onto an old tree stump or a fence or something of this nature. That's where the crew chief comes back into play, as far as checking the locations below it and hopefully being able to tell somewhat of the depth of the water. You wouldn't want to deploy a diver down into 3 feet of water per se. So it's very important as far as being the eyes and the ears of the divers as well as the copter pilot.
I guess a lot of people would take that for granted, as I would. You'd think you're out in the middle of a body of water. I think there's an automatic assumption on most people's part, well, this has got to be at least 10, 15, 20 feet deep, and you don't even think about obstruction. So again, it comes back to what we were talking about before the break, how much importance and the weight that the crew chief carries on him or herself to make sure that the mission is safely executed.
Right. Let me tell you one thing, Dave.
Sure.
If there's going to be a problem with the deployment of divers, we might decide to do something maybe a little different. We'll hook up a tether strap to the bottom of the helicopter and actually pick up the diver on dry land and drag him through the water until we can see it's absolutely safe for him to enter that water, and then he can detach himself at that point in time.
Well, and that does several things then. It conserves the diver's air, because they're not swimming out there, because they're actually above, and it's not as fatiguing for the diver, I imagine.
No, it's not.
As far as when you pick something, talking about carrying somebody out, if you actually are picking somebody up, would you always use the Billy Pugh net, or would you rely on the strap here that we talked about before, or would you just grab hold of the person, and how high up out of the water do you lift them?
Well, it would depend upon each individual situation. We wouldn't want to lift them up that much. If we pick up a diver from the land and transport him out into a body of water, we would probably just drag him through the water per se, just to make sure that his fins are touching the ground in case there's anything that would happen that we would have to detach him from that helicopter. Who would know what type of in-flight emergency might happen? Each crew chief carries a rather large knife in case something like that happens, in case the diver would become entangled in any type of trees or any other obstruction. We can actually cut him away from that helicopter if he couldn't do it himself.
Good point, good point. Now, something else that we had talked about on the break, and I would be remiss for not bringing it up now, some of the training that's done with other organizations. You mentioned SEMA and medical considerations. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. We have SEMA Medics, which is the State Emergency Management Agency. They have a quite array of medical trained staff upon their agency, and we have dipped into that, and we're using some of their paramedics now with our emergency response teams. So we can, in effect, make medical evacuations, and we'll have trained medical personnel on site that are capable and have trained with the helicopters and the air rescue to actually fly those victims to medical facilities.
Some people might think, gosh, that's what they have Lifeline helicopters for, and that we have several, I think, around the state of Indiana, primarily I think of here in Indianapolis at Methodist Hospital. But if we're talking about a critical incident where there are multiple injuries, there may not be the luxury of being able to put everybody in a Lifeline helicopter. They still may need that immediate medical attention, and you're going to take whatever transportation is available.
That's exactly right. The helicopter is kind of a time machine for us. It can actually cut down so much of that golden hour that we're shooting for, and it's really a luxury as far as having a helicopter at your disposal. If, let's say if you're out on an emergency response call and you get a team member that gets shot, let's say he goes down, and the helicopter is directly above, circling, we can call him down with our medic and try to establish whatever life support we can, load him into the helicopter, and then transport him on to the hospital.
An excellent point. And along with talking about that, some people may think, shifting back a little bit to some of the rescue situations, and particularly in the water, might think, gosh, isn't getting a helicopter out there a little bit of an overkill? But there are some very secluded areas as far as where a boat may have been launched to where the accident happened, that it may not be practical to load up a boat where it was originally launched and then send out the rescue team from there.
That's right. Darkness plays a big factor in that, as well as the currents in that particular body of water. It might not be feasible sometimes to put a boat in an open body of water if the current is that would create too big of a risk for people doing the rescue.
And when we're talking about water rescue, I imagine that most of them happen because of some type of a boating accident. And any words of wisdom from your past experience about what people can do to help prevent those kind of situations from happening? Sometimes it involves alcohol or lack of safety equipment or a combination.
Most of it does, Dave, involve alcohol. Also, beyond that, a great number of accidents happen after dark where the watercraft itself hits an object, maybe a bridge abutment or a tree stump or something like this that's out of the water. Think of the possibilities of a skier actually out and hitting a bridge abutment or a tree trunk, or getting his skis tangled up in a fence row or something of this nature. You know, the bodies of water, you don't know what was below those before they became recreational sites. Some of them were open farm fields, others were cleared forests and woods. So there are obstructions down there, and you have to be constantly aware of that.
Well, Roger, I appreciate the time that you have taken to make the trip, as I said, down from Fort Wayne and share with us and the viewers information about the capabilities of the air rescue team for the Indiana State Police. Though we never want to have to use something of that nature, it's good to know that people like you and the other crew chiefs around the state are there to provide that service. And again, thank you for coming out to the show.
Thank you for having me, Dave.
We hope you enjoyed this installation of the Indiana State Police Public Information Program, and tune in again with us for future shows. Take care. Bye-bye.